Notre Dame's Pro Day gave NFL scouts a closer look at Riley Leonard, Xavier Watts, Wojciak, Kiser, and other draft hopefuls. But who boosted their stock and who left questions unanswered? Drew Mentock of Irish Illustrated joins me to break it all down next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, and welcome in. This is Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2010. Now I'm a producer at Fox Sports, and I'm glad to have you here with me on Monday, March 31st. We are coming at you live a little bit later in the day than normal. Our guest actually was part of a severe storm that swept through most of the Midwest, including South Bend, and he had a power outage, so we had to delay our taping time. And for all of you 574 listeners, I hope that you are okay. Your house survived the storm. We're going to get to our guest here in a second, but wanted to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Also wanted to remind you to hit that subscribe button on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you might be tuning in today. But as for this show, we're going to talk about Notre Dame's Pro Day. It's officially in the books, and we got a closer look at how Riley Leonard, Xavier Watts, Wojciak, Kiser, and others performed in front of NFL scouts. Some guys helped their draft stock, others raised more questions, and of course, we had some big names in attendance. Joining me to break it all down is Drew Mentock of Irish Illustrated. He was on the scene at the NFL Combine and the Pro Day, so he was our boots on the ground source for all of this and has great insight on where Notre Dame prospects will get drafted in the upcoming NFL Draft. Let's bring him in. All right, Drew Mentock from Irish Illustrated is back with me here. Just a few days removed from Notre Dame's Pro Day, and overall it seemed like a pretty low-key event, but this was the last chance for all but one of Notre Dame's draft prospects to test in person, the one exception being Benjamin Morrison, which we will get to. But overall, who do you think helped their draft stock the most and why?
Yeah, I think Xavier Watts had the best day. I think his 40 time was like a 4.56, which isn't blazing fast by any means, but I think I asked him afterwards. I was like, I usually try not to lead them too much, but I was like, how satisfied are you with that time? Because it got put on Twitter like 4 minutes before we talked to him, and he was like, I'm very satisfied. Like, people think I'm slow. Now he can prove he's not slow. And I think it really just allows like his tape over the last 2 years to speak for himself. I think we saw a couple years ago, like Jalen Elliott had like a really good Senior Bowl. People were pretty high on him, and then he came out and ran like a 4.7 something and didn't get drafted, and then kind of spent a few years on like practice squads. But that really sidetracked his career. I'm not saying that Watts would have gone undrafted, but I think you could have seen, if he ran a high 4.6 or something like that, you could have seen his stock kind of fall. Whereas now, people have him as kind of an early mid second rounder, and I think that's a very realistic landing spot for him now. And he really cemented that. And, at safety, particularly, like, there's some years where safety doesn't even go in the first round. That probably won't be the case this year, but for him to like cement that spot is pretty significant.
Watts is one of those guys, too, who didn't participate in the Combine despite getting an invite. Did he give you any insight into his training ever since the season ended, which still isn't really that long ago? It's just over 3 months, but he opted to not participate in the Senior Bowl as well. So he was able to come off a 16-game season where he was, I think, second on the team in snaps, and then was able to give himself, a little bit of a break before he was able to ramp up and run full speed at Pro Day.
Yeah, he talked about, asked him about the process. He just mentioned like training in sunny California and kind of getting out there. And I think too, like, it's good for him to have that time to actually rest your body. I think typically after a long season, you hear like Notre Dame players might even kind of pare it down for like 2 weeks just to like completely chill and let their bodies reset and stuff, and maybe just do some walking or something, stuff like that. So skipping the Senior Bowl, not running at the Combine, I'm sure let him kind of have that full, recovery time, and then the full extended training time, which I think is significant.
On the flip side, was there anyone who hurt their stock or maybe just left scouts wanting more?
Yeah, I'm not sure either of them would have been drafted, but receivers Jaden Harrison and Chris Mitchell, I think both to even have a shot to get drafted would have needed to run really blazing fast 40 times. And Mitchell ran a 4.5 flat. Jaden Harrison ran a 4 5'7", so actually slightly slower than Xavier Watts, which, I mean, going into it, I thought Harrison would be the fastest runner at Notre Dame's pro day. I was thinking like 4.4s is like maybe he'll even go 4.3s. Like he just had that reputation going back to last spring, as like the fastest guy in the team is the way his teammates talked about him. But I guess we kind of saw with those two that maybe that's why they weren't kind of the deep threats that we were anticipating last fall, was maybe they just don't have the speed. However, with Chris Mitchell, he posted on Twitter the next day that he didn't run a 4 time. If you know, you know. So it kind of I've never seen a player dispute Notre Dame's pro day time before. Usually those are more favorable and generous than, you would get at the combine or something like that, obviously. So maybe he's a little faster. It's hard to tell from just watching him in person if there was, if he was faster than what he looked. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting story coming out of that.
I was personally surprised by the 4.57 for Jaden Harrison. I understand that he's more quick than he is fast. And credit to him, he ran, I think, the fastest three cone drill of anyone there, which makes sense. He was a very shifty guy, but 4.57 for a guy of his caliber, we saw it on the biggest play, or one of the biggest plays of the entire season, when he returned that kickoff for a touchdown against Georgia. Like, he looked fast there. But as for Chris Mitchell, I'm not gonna lie, I would have been, pissed would have been the wrong word probably, but a little bit disappointed if Chris Mitchell did run like a 4.3, because when he came over to Notre Dame from Florida International, he was described as a deep threat, and he was supposed to be a guy who could take the top off the defense. But that just never happened with him at Notre Dame in his one and only season. I don't think he caught one deep ball. Now that I think about it, he almost became a possession receiver, still a valuable asset. But if he had run a 4.3, I'd have been like, how did they not figure out a way to get this ball get this guy the ball on a go route?
Well, and it's interesting too, thinking back to like last spring, I think Mike Brown would talk about how we're trying to make him more a complete receiver and do all these other things other than run deep. And maybe Mike Brown realized something that we didn't, which that we're not sure he has the size or speed to be the type of threat he was down in Florida. So we're going to try and turn him into a more complete receiver. So in hindsight, maybe that was Notre Dame's like, this isn't quite what we expected, so we're going to try and push him to do this. So yeah, that's definitely interesting.
Riley Leonard chose not to run the 40-yard dash or participate in the jumps, which for me was the most disappointing part of this entire pro day, because that is what I was most looking forward to. It's hard to really argue with this logic. He said, hey, everyone already thinks I'm really fast. We're going to keep it that way. But what did you make of that decision, and how might NFL teams view it?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, I was like you, I was very disappointed. I wanted to see him test and jump almost, especially after watching his like high school dunk highlights. Like, does he have a 40-inch vertical? Like, those are things I really wanted to see. I mean, I think there is I think his logic does kind of add up, but I also wonder, I mean, he's had multiple ankle surgeries over the last year. I'm wondering if maybe he isn't as fast as he thought he was previously, or maybe during this training process, he felt he needed to work more on his footwork and some other, like his deep ball and stuff like that. And he didn't want to devote as much effort to running when maybe he was never going to run people see him as such an accomplished runner. Maybe he's not going to run a 4.6 or something like that is going to confirm what people saw. But yeah, it's hard to say exactly what scouts thought, but I guess that ultimately that's how fast he runs isn't the most important thing. So
yeah, I really wanted to see him do the vertical jump. I looked it up. Anthony Richardson has the highest vertical of any quarterback at the combine, which was 40.5. I don't think Riley Leonard could have gotten quite that high up in the air, but I think he would have been close, man. But that's a good point about how he spent his time training, because he just didn't really have that much to gain by running his 40. I mean, unless he ran like a 4.5, which I don't think was in the cards there. And probably more necessary to spend all of his time working on his footwork and working on his passing ability, because that is definitely the biggest question mark on him going to the draft. Like, everyone knows he's a great runner of the football, but he unofficially completed 62 of 66 passes. As you mentioned, you're reporting, some scouts were a little bit concerned about the fact his receivers had to work extra on some of those deep throws. But how did you evaluate his performance throwing the ball?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of saw what I was just happened to be standing near a scout for an AFC East team as he was throwing some of those deep balls, and you kind of like, they saw him having to work a little bit, like you said, because you don't want the receiver to be having to slow down as the ball's coming to him. So I think even some of those completions that you saw on those deep balls, even if they're 45 yards down the field, like if the guy's having to slow down, obviously that makes it harder for them to compete for the ball. It gives the DBs a chance to catch up, and also is more likely to be intercepted than a ball is overthrown. And he even talked about afterwards, like his objective was to overthrow them, and that he started to do that towards the end of his like passing script. But I think it actually makes it maybe a little more concerning that his objective was to overthrow his receivers, if anything. And early on, I feel like he was underthrowing them a little bit, even if they were completions far down the field and looked good on if you were watching from home on Peacock or whatnot. But I do think that was probably a little concerning. I also don't have another quarterback to compare him to because he's the only one throwing that day. But I think he looked better. I think his footwork looked cleaner. I think I'm sure it helped with some of the more intermediate or short routes, having receivers he was familiar with and knew how fast they were and stuff like that. So I think he did do well, and I think he I still think he'll get drafted at some point and did enough to he probably didn't erase anybody's concerns, but he didn't do anything that hurt himself either.
We're going to be right back with Drew in a moment for more insight into Notre Dame's Pro Day. But first, a word from FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. So Houston was my pick to win it all when the tournament started, and even though Duke has looked unstoppable lately, I'm still a believer in the Cougs. Houston is a 4.5-point dog against the Blue Devils in the Final Four, but I'm sticking with my pick. Give me Houston money line. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. I was pretty surprised that Benjamin Morrison hasn't even scheduled his personal showcase yet. So when you came on last time, it was right after the Combine. We knew that he wasn't going to be doing much at the Pro Day and that he was going to put pretty much everything into this personal showcase. And I understand his decision to not do either of those things. But at this point, I think it's fair to be a little bit concerned about his health because he says he's full go, but isn't ready to be back on the field and doesn't really know when he's going to be. So what's your read on this situation?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I mean, he's going to have to test and prove it at some point, but it does seem a little odd with a lot of pro days were happening now or, like over the last few days. And so, the draft's in less than a month. It does seem like, wouldn't you want to get this happen? I don't know all like the GM, processes, but like they're working on their boards, like they're trying to figure out how they rank people. And it just seems like more of a disservice, especially as all this information is coming and they're not even sure exactly when to do it. I do think it helps him that like scouts look back at his tape from 2 years ago against people like Marvin Harrison Jr. Like people love that. Like that is absolutely something they're going to want to go see. But like, I do feel like there's going to be extra pressure for him to like run the 40 well to do really good at his showcase. And I even asked him like, how are you training for this? And he was like, I'm working more on football drills because like that's my ultimate goal is to like be able to like lock down and take away top receivers in the NFL. I'm less worried about, how I'm going to test, which I think might serve him better, I guess, ultimately when he gets to the NFL, but he may end up being like a 3rd round draft pick or something like that, which kind of seemed impossible a year ago for sure. I mean, he looked like he was a lock 1st rounder and until he answers those questions. And I'm not even sure he's going to be a guy who blows people away with his 40 in general. I think he's very technically sound and uses leverage well and things like that. So it'll definitely be interesting to see. And I'm kind of curious even how that information will come out to us, considering like, it's not like I'm going to be down there to watch that or will be televised or anything too. So
do you know if he went through the process of like doing all the medicals when he was at the Combine? I know that's not part of the Pro Day, but when he was there in Indianapolis, did he go through that whole process? Because I think honestly at this point, like that is more important for his draft prospects than the actual personal test, like doing a 40-yard dash or a 3-cone drill. That seems to be the only question about him at this point.
Yeah, he did do that. And in fact, he went towards the end of the day when they had to. So they do like at the combine, they have a day where they like do medicals in the morning and they interview with the media after. And he was like kind of scheduled towards the end of the day for the media stuff. And he still showed up like an hour late. And there was no other prospects in the like convention hall room that were in. And he kind of walked in and there were a bunch of us waiting. And he like kind of explained that. So not only did he go through the medical evaluation process, it took longer than everyone else because I think so many teams are curious and they probably want to get their own physician's opinion or at least somebody they trust on things or have extra things looked at. So he definitely was scrutinized heavily in that department.
Right, because it's not just the hip thing, too. He's also coming off a pretty serious shoulder surgery that he had this time last year, basically missed all of spring practice. And I mean, I remember there being some doubt about whether or not he was going to be ready to go for the season opener against Texas A&M. Then he recovers from that, and then he has to deal with this hip injury. But Jack Kiser is another guy who I was really excited to see do testing. I thought he had a pretty strong showing, 4.62 40. That's pretty solid for a linebacker. But do you think he's done enough at this point to improve his draft stock? Like, where do you think he's going to end up?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say. I mean, you look at like, I think J.D. Bertrand was like a 5th rounder last year. Maris Leofau, I think, went in the 3rd round. So I could see him probably being more of a 4th or 5th round guy. I think he's definitely cemented himself as a guy who I feel like that's probably a theme is a lot of guys either did well enough coming into this pro day to like not hurt themselves and really kind of like solidify like kind of how teams view them. And I think Kiser's like fits right in with that. I think with him, he's had such a good like post national championship run for him. Like he was voted the MVP for linebacker for his team at the Senior Bowl. He's a guy who's going to interview incredibly well at the NFL Combine and impress people, and then had a really good pro day. So I think if you look at all those things kind of in conjunction with each other, like his stock had already been ascending since late January. That I don't know if he's improved that, but he's done nothing in that time to like make teams be like question him or like why did we think so highly of him a month ago. So I think he's really had a great for a 6-year guy who maybe people could try and knock for that. I think he's done a really good job getting ready through this whole process.
Mitchell Evans is the only player who completed all the testing at the NFL Combine, and then he improved in pretty much every aspect at his pro day, which isn't too big of a surprise, right? I mean, the Combine was just a few weeks removed from the national championship game, but you saw him work out at both. Was there a noticeable difference in his production and just the way he moved?
I didn't necessarily pick up on anything like that. I mean, he was 5 pounds lighter, which for some of the quickness drills and stuff like the 40, I'm sure could have a little bit of impact. But I think ultimately it probably speaks a little bit to the fact that nobody else worked out. This is part of the reason why you want that more extra time to recover, get your body more fine-tuned for the specific drills that aren't necessarily translate to what you did on the football field. You don't train to run a 40 when you're getting ready for a football game. So it gives you that extra time to train and get your body right. And I think it's probably a little bit of that. And he actually had that time to do it. And I think his ultimately working out at the Combine was more to show show teams he's durable. Like he had the ACL injury and then he played all 16 games. He did at least one practice at the East-West Shrine Bowl. And then he came to the Combine and still put up pretty good numbers. I think that was more his objective rather than be like, how am I going to test? And I think he accomplished that. And then teams now can look at, take maybe his Combine numbers with a grain of salt and then also look at what he did at the pro day too.
Bo Collins is a guy that everyone expected to test well, and that's exactly what he did. I thought his 40 time could be a little bit better. He ran a 4.52, so I don't know if that's enough to really change the perception about him, but a 38-inch vertical, his broad jump was really strong as well. Do you think it was enough for him to get his name called in April?
I still do. There's Matt Miller for ESPN's like one of their draft analysts. The morning of the pro day, he released a 7-round mock draft, and I don't believe he had Collins getting drafted in that. But I still think he's the type of guy who his production's never where it should have been, but you look at those testing numbers, he's a willing special teams player. Like he's willing to talk about that. He's also, if you ever have the chance to talk to him, like he's he comes across very impressive. Like he's very like kind of calm and thoughtful and confident. Like those things all come out. So I'm sure he like interviews well. And I kind of look at like Ben Skoranek a few years ago. Like they're similar height. Ben didn't test at the pro day because he had a foot injury. But he's still a guy who was a late, a 7th round pick. And I kind of view as like kind of similar production and kind of similar reasons. Like I think he's going to be a guy, unless his like agent is really pushing for him not to get drafted because they have a spot that they really want him to be able to sign as a free agent. I kind of think he's the type of guy a team's going to want to take because there is some upside there. And at worst case scenario, if your 6th receiver is also like a pretty good special teams player who is a good culture guy, like that's a good person to draft.
I think the biggest red flag with Collins is not necessarily the lack of production, it's the drops. And it's kind of unfortunate timing, the way things played out over the weekend where Bo Collins goes out, he performs at Pro Day, and I think it was like the next day, Mike Denbrock spoke with the media and said there was just way too many damn drops last year by the wide receivers and the passing game was going to take a significant step forward. And then you look at the stat sheet, Bo Collins led the team in drops with 7. So I don't think it was intentional by Denbrock, but I don't think that was helping out Collins' draft stock either.
No, you're right. The drops is definitely the biggest merit, and I forget what it is on Pro Football Focus. It's like 7 or 8.
Yeah, he had 7 last year, and honestly, it felt like more.
Yeah,
There's a couple ones that like maybe they don't classify as drops. You're like, man, he probably could have gotten that.
I think I was going to say the same thing. I think it was probably higher than 7. Maybe there's some that were like a little low, like Riley Leonard sidearmed it a little bit, and it was at his knees or shins, and he got his hands on it, and that should count as a drop. But maybe Pro Football Focus was a little generous with that.
Couple other transfers I want to ask about: Jordan Clark and Rod Hurd. Both those guys bring versatility to the secondary. I think they were big additions for the Notre Dame defense this past year. I don't really see either one of these guys being drafted, but I do think that given their versatility, both of them could make an NFL roster and be a factor on special teams. And then, with Jordan Clark, his dad, is a legend in the NFL, played for the Steelers for a long time. Mike Tomlin was there. So what do you think the future is for Clark and Hurd at the next level?
Yeah, I agree with you. I would be very surprised unless somehow like his dad got a favor from a team or somebody to take him really late. I don't really see them getting drafted. They both ran a 4.64 40-yard dash, which is the same as Max Hurlman, a walk-on. So I don't think if they're both undersized defensive backs. They're both about, I believe, like 180 pounds. If you're undersized and you don't have an obvious elite trait, Jordan Clark's best testing number, I would argue, is his bench press. He put up 18 reps at 225, which is pretty good for a guy who weighs 180 pounds. But it's just hard for me to see a team wanting to take that. But I agree. I wouldn't be surprised if both of them find their way into an NFL roster, especially Clark, who I think really impressed all of us last year. I don't think I had very high expectations, but he really was one of their better, more consistent defensive backs all last year. So, yeah. And sometimes I think it's ultimately with people like that too. It's better for them to pick a situation through undrafted free agency that might suit what they're looking for and their potential opportunities than just to like get thrown into a situation because a coach is like, we need to take a guy here. We're just going to take a flyer on somebody. So I think, yeah, I'm definitely in agreement with you.
RJ Oben had solid production when he was at Duke. He was not as productive at Notre Dame, but still he has the measurables that get you excited. And he also got invited to the Senior Bowl, which I thought was pretty interesting. And I think he generated some draft buzz. Do you think he's a sleeper who could sneak into like a late round selection?
Yeah, I referenced Matt Miller's 7th-round draft earlier. Oben was included in that. He was like a 7th-round pick, I want to say. So I think there's definitely scouts who could look at the measurables and look more back to his film at Duke. I know for the Senior Bowl, I believe he was a pretty late ad because so many people like, Xavier Watts and stuff like that started declining after their extended playoff runs. But yeah, I could definitely see him getting drafted. I also think it was noticeable at the Pro Day. He played last fall. He came in at like 265, and I think he tested at about 252 and looked I would say like going through the drills and stuff looked noticeably like kind of a little more agile and better control of his body. And I want to say that's more so where he was when he was at Duke as well. Um, so maybe if you're an NFL team, you're thinking maybe he put on some bad weight at Notre Dame and that kind of delayed his production and effectiveness, but at least he still, fought through the whole season, had arguably one of the biggest plays all year. So I'm not going to be surprised if he gets drafted. It wouldn't be based on what he did at Notre Dame largely, but he has the potential. His dad played in the NFL, so he has a pedigree too. He's also, like with the vast majority of Notre Dame players, they're going to be good culture guys. He's not going to go in there expecting more than what a 7th round pick should in terms of his opportunities either.
Just got a couple more questions left for you. Want to ask about Howard Cross. I don't think anyone expected him to light it up at the Combine or the Pro Day, but then there was that weird bit after the Combine where teams were asking him to potentially train at fullback. I know he spoke a little bit about that and what he plans to do at the next level, but to me, I don't care if he gets drafted. I think he's going to find a spot on somebody's roster because he's just that good at his position. I also think that this past year, he was not healthy for the entire year, and his numbers took a little bit of a dip, but I just think he's such a smart player, too, that he's going to figure out some path in the NFL. But you had the chance to catch up with him. What did he have to say about where things stand with his draft process?
Yeah, he is. Yeah, to reference the fullback thing, he talked about it. I think he was willing to do it. I don't think he actually had to do that at the Combine or didn't do it at Notre Dame's Pro Day, but he went out and bought Howard Cross's huge hands. So I think he had to rapidly try and find quadruple XL gloves and get ready to try and do it. So I think he's willing to, but I kind of agree with you. His draft stock really hasn't looked good. I think Matt Miller, again, going back to that, didn't have him in that mock draft for 7 rounds, but he did after the Pro Day talk about how impressed he was with some of Howard Cross's times. His explosiveness is pretty weak. If you look at his broad jump and vertical, neither of those are very good. I want to say his vertical was in the high 20s. But amongst defensive tackles, I think his 3-cone drill and his 20-yard shuttle would have been 3rd and 4th at the NFL Combine if he had run there and produced those times. So I think you see he does have some, kind of upper echelon traits that they could potentially get excited about. He's another guy who is the NFL pedigree too, so it'd be kind of interesting how he navigates that process. But yeah, he definitely seems like kind of a Kurt Heinisch type in a different way, even though he's more productive, has a better reputation. Kurt didn't get drafted and just re-signed with the Texans, I think, recently for another 1-year deal. So he's a guy I could see sticking around, but right now it doesn't seem like a guy people, a 6-year player, didn't put up the production last year. You saw maybe if he gets injured, he doesn't really have the tools to be that level of player you want him to be, but I think he has the mentality to make his way into a roster and still have a productive career. It's just going to depend on the situation.
Notre Dame put out the graphic that all 32 teams had some representation at the Pro Day. I saw that Mike Tomlin was there speaking with Jordan Clark, which certainly makes sense. And there were some other notable NFL decision makers in attendance at Pro Day. Was there one team where you noticed, wow, they have a lot more people here than the others, or any other notable names that we should know were present for Notre Dame's Pro Day?
Yeah, I was going to bring up Mike Tomlin for that. I think it's notable when the head coach comes there. And I believe he came last year as well. So I don't think this is a regular thing, but it's definitely notable to have another team's head coach there. And he was walking around engaged the whole time. It's not like he stopped in, maybe, spoke to NBC real quick and got out of there. He was there. He was, and it's not like he was just there catching up with Jordan Clark's dad or something and goofing off. He seemed to be looking at it. So I think that's very notable. And they have a couple former Notre Dame guys on the team too. So,
all right, you can read all of Drew's work on irishillustrated.com. He's been my go-to source throughout this draft process. Will continue to be all the way through. Also made some time for us after the severe storm that hit South Bend. So, Drew, thanks for the time, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. Because we had to release this one later in the day than normal, this is going to be the last episode until Wednesday morning, but make sure you tune in on Wednesday. Tom Noy, basketball beat writer from the South Bend Tribune, is going to join me to talk about how Notre Dame men's basketball season ended, and it wasn't really a great season. We're going to put some final thoughts on that. Plus, the women's team fell short once again. They lost to TCU in the Sweet 16. We're going to talk about how Coach Ivey's squad may have underachieved this season. So make sure you tune into that on Wednesday and make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. Also, if you enjoyed the show today, remember, like the video below if you're watching along on YouTube, or rate the podcast 5 stars and leave a review. I'll see you Wednesday.